thank you, Tech Channel, for inviting us to the experts panel. And we are here today to talk about cybersecurity. And you might be asking, why cybersecurity? Well, the IBM 2024 Marketplace Survey, not unlike the last 5 years, our customers, rather, told us that cybersecurity was their number one thing on their mind. And I'm Tom Huntington from Fortra. I'm our Executive Vice President of Technical Solutions at Fortra and an IBM Power Champion. And I do a lot of presentations in the IBM Marketplace, so I'm excited to be here with you. I'm joined by two of my colleagues. First, we have Sandi Moore. Sandi, tell the audience a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Tom. Sandi Moore. I've been working on IBM for a little over 20 years, since kindergarten, and I really have focused a lot on security. It's really something I'm really passionate about. So it's been fun to be able to work with customers and actually explore what their options are. And I'm looking forward to talking about it today too.
Excellent. Thanks, Sandi. And Amy, how about you? What's your experience in IBM?
So I've actually been around the IBM longer than I realized, since 1994 in some capacity. So we'll figure out how many years that was later. What I'm most excited about now is that I actually really get to work with customers to affect change in their environments and be able to help them get their systems more secure, because we can apply what we've learned and really fast track them to that end goal that they've got.
And like myself, Amy Williams is also an IBM champion, so it's really nice to have you distinguish as that and be one of our guests today. So, Amy, when we look at cybersecurity, what do you think the biggest challenges are with the IBM profiles?
Well, certainly I think the number one that we run into is the overprivileged accounts. So for a really long time, the easiest way to make anything work is just to give a user profile all object. And you would think that that isn't still the case, but it still is. So all object authority. And now as all object authority gets addressed, we've been able to start addressing some of the others, because there's some sneaky ones like audit authority, IO-sysconfig, which allows you to change the logging on the system. And IO-sysconfig allows you to present shares. And I know Sandi will have a chat about the risk that shares present to the system. So being able to really understand what those profiles can do, what that overprivileged account can actually affect on the system is really important to us. And then the other thing that we still run into way more often than I would hope are default passwords and default profiles. And when we think about default passwords, we want to think about not only on an IBM where that default password is the same as the profile, but also any of those application accounts that come shipped with products that we buy and that we install across the board, right? There's a lot of shops that run a lot of the same software, and those passwords are well known. So a well-known password is the same as a default password, and that can provide risk in your environments, right? As people come and go, as people move around shops, the IBM tech world is pretty small, and you're going to work with the same people over and over again. So having control over those, having some kind of regular change of those service profiles, definitely changing the defaults when you install new software is super important. And then even those are overprivileged, right? So it all kinds of winds into that same story. And I know, Sandi, you've run into these on some of the engagements you've done.
Absolutely. Default passwords are all too common, and people forget that even a default password for a device like an RF gun or a scanner, something like that, there's no restriction on how it can be used. The idea is that it's tied to this one device, but it's not always the case, and it's just ripe for being taken advantage of, I think.
Mm-hmm. And what's exciting is that there are. Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I was going to say, those are both great points. The application profiles that come shipped, and then these default devices, we think, oh, they're just used for RF, but people sign on with other intentions when they're bad actors.
Well, I mean, the IBM the I stands for integration. People don't realize how integrated that system truly is in their enterprise, in their environments. IBM made it an incredibly easy system to connect with, to be able to get data from. We have lots of customers we work with where the IBM is their core database server, and
Sure.
they have integrated it throughout all of their processes, whether it's their ERP, their manufacturing, their logistic services. That database is everything to them. So being able to get that authority under control, knowing those service profiles and that those profiles have been reduced to that least privilege, and understanding how they're operating within the environment. So we talked about the RF guns. There are ways that you can restrict those profiles to those specific devices, but it does take that effort. So again, being able to get people there quicker. I remember being an admin and, you had that 10-item list that you were trying to get done, and security was always number 12. So trying to get security higher on that list, being able to have the attention to it that it deserves, I really feel like we're able to enable people to do that. And especially on IBM it is so securable. It allows for those configurations to be able to be made without necessarily having to go through a lot of hoops that you find with other operating systems when I talk to other security professionals and what they go through to secure their systems.
Okay. So I think we need to move on to our next topic, which really ties into profiles. And, Sandi, this is for you. What is multi-factor authentication? What does it mean to you, and what does it mean to our customers?
I think we all are very familiar with multi-factor authentication. Everything we do, it has some sort of multi-factor authentication tied to it, whether you're signing onto your PC, you're signing into network resources, even your bank accounts are going to have, the option to activate multi-factor authentication. Where we tend to forget is that with IBM we should be doing that as well. And it can be a very valuable extra layer. If you think about admins, Amy was just talking about overprivileged users. Anybody who has one of those special authorities should be considered an administrator. And we want to validate when that user signs on, is it really them or is it a compromised password? So by adding a layer of multi-factor authentication, you're going to take out that compromised password as that single point of compromise or failure. I think
so it's no longer just a profile, a password.
Exactly.
It's something else, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah. So Sandi signs on to the system. Sandi wrote her password on a Post-it note and left it on her desk. And the guy who walked by and said, I see that. I'm going to teach her a lesson, whatever it is, whether it's a threat actor or someone being funny, those are the things we just can't afford to happen. And so, it is a layer that is often overlooked. We rely on, they got onto the network, they were authenticated. It's not enough. The core server has to be protected too.
So when customers ask you about MFA, why are they asking you? What are they looking for? Why do they think they need MFA?
Unfortunately, a lot of the times it's a regulatory compliance requirement or it's insurance. Cyber insurance policies are cracking down on authentication and adding that additional authentication layer. So it's unfortunately sometimes it's a push from an external source that's saying you have to do this, as opposed to it being something that's being done because it's the right thing to do.
Okay. And Amy, from your perspective, when should somebody use MFA on IBM?
So, I mean, at a minimum, and Sandi said it, those privileged accounts, right? That MFA is taking you beyond the credentials, right? Leaving that password on the Post-it note, putting it on the bottom of their laptops, having it posted on their screen, right? I wish these things weren't true, but I still hear these stories all the time. So certainly at a minimum, administrators should be using MFA, because what the MFA really allows you to do is it proves who's using the credentials, right? Otherwise, all it is a user profile and a password. You have no tie to the person that it was assigned to, I'm going to put that in quotes, is really the person using it until you do that MFA validation, right? That's proving who's using those credentials, not just that the credentials are known. So yeah, at a minimum, administrators, at best practice, anyone that can make changes to your system and your application, right? So that's all your end users, right? They should be proving that they are who they are, and it's not just somebody that they have in their house that got their creds that's doing some work for them, for better for worse, right?
So what about, like, I hear customers say, well, I have Okta, I have Duo, I have something else in the enterprise. Do I still need IBM multi-factor authentication?
Absolutely. And it is actually, there's ways that, with Fortra, we provide our PowerTech multi-factor authentication, and that can tie into an existing multi-factor authentication setup on the network side.
Mm-hmm.
So it can make it very simple to roll out and add that layer without having to have your end users deal with multiple devices and multiple configurations.
Got it. Okay, so off of MFA, let's talk antivirus ransomware for IBM. Sandi, is this an issue for IBM customers to be worried about?
Yes, unfortunately it is. It's something that we've seen for years. It is not new, but we seem to be getting a lot more attention around it. And I think ransomware attacks have really amplified the issue. And, IBM integrated, as Amy said, it's integrated in everything we do, and all of the data access on the system. And then there's added on this layer of the integrated file system, which can act as a really happy host to malware. It can be hosted out to end users. It can be hosted out to administrators, passed along to customers, vendors, anybody you do business with, and you're sharing files. So it can act as that host, but it can also be attacked by ransomware. And through the practice of creating shares over IFS directories, it just opens the door for that. You don't even have to map a drive anymore. I mean, this is, if it's accessible and a discoverable share on the network, it can be compromised. And depending on what's shared. Yeah.
When you say it, you mean IBM. If you share
the IBM, the server itself
okay.
can, if you share any folders of the integrated file system from IBM, you create that exposure. Even using the integrated file system utility in ACS provides direct access to the file server, the integrated file system through the file server.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's not an island. It's not an isolated server. And the IFS really is, unfortunately, very vulnerable in those instances. Even the operating system can be impacted. If there's a shared root directory and that user that has access to that share gets compromised, the entire operating system can be clobbered. And we've seen it happen multiple times. It's very unfortunate.
So Amy, if that were to happen to a customer, what would they do if they did actually have ransomware on IBM? What would you recommend they do?
So it's going to depend on where that ransomware was able to reach, right? So Sandi just mentioned, if you've got that share starting at root and you haven't set root to read only, it can rip through the entire IFS all the way down even to the QSys live file system. And when we talk about the QSys live file system, that's your database, that's your operating system. And we've done this in the lab. We've destroyed one of our systems. It will encrypt the DB2 files, right? So the ransomware that's out there, any share that's presented is vulnerable and at risk and putting your system at risk. So certainly, if they've been affected, their best bet is that they have a backup, right? So whether it's replication and the backup from last night, daily backups, you're going to be recovering. It really is the only way to get those files back that ransomware affected.
Got it. It is. I mean, backups, we can't forget about backups. An important part of cybersecurity. So with all that said, how does Fortra solve these problems for customers with profiles, MFA, and antivirus? I'll throw that over to you, Sandi, first, if you want to tackle that.
Yeah, so I mentioned Partech multi-factor authentication. That gives a really good layer of authenticating users. For the ransomware and the virus issues, our Partech antivirus with the anti-ransomware technology does a really good job of creating that native virus scanning to protect the server itself. And it's, the network controls are all valuable. They have to be in place, but it's all about those layers, slowing down those attacks. And with the anti-ransomware technology, we're actually able to stop the attack. So reducing the blast zone, so you have less to recover, less. And anymore, these ransomware attacks, they're not just damaging files, they're holding them hostage, and they will expose that data. So it's not just the damage, it's the reputation, the data that's left your environment that we need to worry about. And so stopping the attack quickly and reducing what's exposed is really important.
Yeah.
And I think
good.
Amy, she's got some great, suggestions around the user profiles and what we can do there.
Well, and certainly with the user profiles, right? If ransomware gets, they click on that wrong link and they happen to be an admin and they've got all object authority to your system, it's kind of that worst case, scenario, the perfect storm, where if you've reduced that access, where they have only the access to the data they need, they have only the access to the IFS folders they need, you're going to reduce that, availability for ransomware to hit you, right? With using MFA, right, it's not going to be able to just be anybody that has network access, that got creds. They're going to have to prove who they are again. And when we go to least privilege on the IBMI, we can take things not only at the user profile and getting those to not have privileges, but also your objects, right? And that's where we talk about making sure root is read only, making sure that the folders that you do have exposed have the right authorities. And the tools within Fortra, range from the monitoring, right? So we have Exit Point Manager that's going to be looking at those outside in accesses and what that activity is, and making sure that you're only allowing the people that should have FTP, the people that should be accessing the file server, that access, to reportings, right? So Compliance Monitor in the PowerTech line is an incredibly powerful tool to let you know what activity is happening on your system, so you can start identifying normal activity versus, exceptional activity. And let's not forget about integration. So my next favorite, and this has become a lot more popular, is SOCs, right? So security operational centers that are watching all of the enterprise, they should be watching the IBMI too. And we have a fantastic tool, our SIM agent, that will allow all of that activity. So not only from the security journal, but also from your application messages, right? A lot of the application packages have their own messaging, critical information about changes being made to those applications, changes being made within the files or the data of those applications that can get sent to those operational centers, so that you're not finding out on Monday morning that you had an event that started on Friday night.
Okay. Well, Amy and Sandi, two leading experts in the IBMI community around the world on IBMI cybersecurity. It's been great having you share your thoughts and expertise on cybersecurity in relationship to IBMI. I want to thank Tech Channel for having us here today. And certainly with Fortra, it can start with a free engagement. We can scan your system, and it can lead all the way up into services where we actually help you analyze your profiles, set up things like single sign-on, multi-factor authentication for you. So again, thank you, Tech Channel. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Sandi. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, guys.